Okay, Bethany Webster, welcome to Power Presence Position.
Hi, Eleanor. It's so great to be here.
It's always amazing to spend time with you. And I have spent hours and hours curled up in my bed with Discovering the Inner Mother, incredible book, of course. And also, I have before that had been really intrigued by and a student of your work with the mother wound. So we're going to talk about all of that and talk about how the mother wound impacts women's relationships in business, how you developed this incredible body of work. But before we get there, I want you to take us back to little Bethany. Like, tell us a little bit about how you grew up, what your childhood was like, and how you ultimately transitioned into the kind of work that you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I grew up in a very normal middle-class family in North America in the Northeast, and I was a very perceptive child from birth, extremely perceptive. And my parents were really young when they had me, so they were a young couple, and they both kind of came from troubled-ish families. One was more upper class, one was like more working class. And so they kind of were high school sweethearts and married each other very early and had kids early. And I thought I had a normal childhood basically until I got to college. And that's when I started experiencing a really extreme symptoms. And I was like, wow, what's going on? I think I was a sophomore in college. I was about 19 years old. And I was like, something's up, because I feel like I came from a normal family. I don't understand. I started having panic attacks and feeling a lot of anxiety, hopelessness, things like that. And I got into therapy early, which was a godsend. I found a really brilliant feminist psychotherapist who does depth psychotherapy, which is a certain kind of therapy that's about long-term depth, going into kind of reworking your attachment bond with the therapist. So it's extremely niche kind of therapy. I didn't even realize that at the time. I was just like, this is the first therapist I'm going to work with. So I got kind of lucky. But what I discovered was that it wasn't a normal childhood. And this was something I had to realize over time and do a lot of grieving around. But what I found was I played the role of the sponge and caretaker of the whole family. I thought this was totally normal, but my parents had a tumultuous marriage. My mother was depressed a lot of the time. So I was kind of her confidant, caretaker. And I, protected my brother from my dad. Mediated fights between them. I called my dad late at the bar, trying to get him to come home. There was a lot of tumult that was happening. And I was like, I'm going to be the one to fix it. So basically what that meant was my needs had to be invisible. And I had to develop this role-based identity of a caretaker over functioner kind of. I had to grow up really quickly. I actually never identified as a child. I always identified as like a little adult. So, but I just thought this was normal growing up, had nothing to compare it to. And it wasn't, as I said, until college when I started to actually explore what happened, because my body and
why
my psyche.
was that, right? Because was it that you were now living with a cohort of people who were around your age? Like, what was it that had you say, hey, maybe my experience and growing up wasn't quote unquote normal? What was it? Was it the symptoms, or was it hearing other people's stories? I'm so curious what triggered that.
Yeah. You know what I think triggered it was that I suddenly had to be independent and be an individual self. And my whole existence prior to that, up to 18 years, was to not be a self, was to exist. I had to not exist. So at the base of my psyche was this belief that my needs are bad. I am bad. There was a grief of not being able as a child to make my needs go away, because my needs became the source of disconnection and abandonment. So I began to equate my own humanity, basically needs, wants, feelings, all of that, as a cause to be abandoned.
And say more about that. Yeah. My needs were a cause of abandonment, and I think disassociation. I think that's the word that you used. Can you give an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah, exactly. An example of that would be like my mom had such a low capacity for emotional resilience. So when I was upset or needed help, she would be like, what do you want? Like, she couldn't even listen to me. So I got the message, oh, my emotions actually make people not want to be around me. So I have to hide that, because to children, preserving that connection with the caregiver is paramount. It's actually survival. It's not just like a preference or a want. It's life or death to a child's psyche, because a child is dependent, powerless, totally vulnerable on the parents. And a child needs the external validation and support of the parents to feel safe. And I did not feel safe. And my nervous system was jacked up constantly in fear. Like, I realized, because I didn't have enough emotional support, I really relied on my mind to mother me. I kind of saw mind as mother. So I would, like, my parents would get really upset about little things like a flat tire or a bill that they couldn't afford, and they didn't hide anything. There was no boundaries. They would fight about sex right in front of us. So there was no boundaries. So it's almost like I didn't have a skin. So I was just constantly in this hyper vigilant mode of like trying to plan out what could go wrong, potential contingencies, and solutions. And I was hiding it. I looked like a completely well-functioning child. I remember someone said, "You're 8 going on 28." And I was like, because I could talk with adults and everything. So I just had to overfunction in just so many ways, because being a child, and a child is need personified, my parents just didn't have the capacity, because they were like freaking out children. They were wounded children themselves in adult bodies. Yeah. So I had to it's like I became a muscle that was overdeveloped, but I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't feel safe to like, I just rejected, just like they did, my own needs and wants and values and like fears and all of that.
So you become a 19, 20-year-old young woman at college. You've lived 100 years already.
Yeah.
It must have felt like, yeah.
It did. And I didn't know how to function as an individual. Like, I think I talk about this in the book, that I remember trying to prepare meals for myself. I had gotten an apartment, and I would didn't know how to feed myself. I would just not feed myself. I'd go till 4 p.m. before I ate anything. Because there was this battle I felt where, how do I nourish myself as an individual? I've always kind of ate my mother's food, who was to please her. Yeah. So it was like, I didn't know how to function without the caretaking, overgiving, approval seeking mode. I was kind of just this undeveloped being that was longing for mother, longing for attention, longing for some kind of connection, but feeling like I had to there was transactional based. I'd have to defer to other people's reality, or defend my reality to be a separate person. So I think it was this conflict of, who the hell am I outside of this dysfunctional family system that I had to adapt to?
And the irony, of course, is that what you're talking about is this idea of this process of individuation, which is actually supposed to happen when we're 5, or or the psychologists who are listening will understand more. You probably do. You too understand more about when, but that's a process that is supposed to happen when we're very young. And you are this high functioning person who is both very mature, but also parts would have been underdeveloped or immature, childlike in some ways. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think, it's exploitation. I don't think my parents intended it at all, but they used me to fill in the gaps of their own, immature places. So around 18, 19 is actually when the child starts to launch into her individuality. And because I had a codependency with my mother, she actually kind of discouraged that natural evolution where a daughter, early or late teens, early 20s daughter starts to launch into her own identity, into her own stuff. And my mom was like, I miss you, don't move too far away. I was her savior. I was her mother. right? She kind of made me into her own mother. People that might want to understand that dynamic, I recommend the book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, which is a classic, but it really explains that kind of dynamic where the mother gap of the mother, she may, and this isn't true for everyone, there's many different dynamics that can happen between mothers and daughters, but this one I find is actually really common where, you know, and because we live in a patriarchy, mothers themselves are not, they're exploited as well, and they're not given a lot of support as women or as mothers. So there is a ravenousness that many women bring to motherhood that's just there. And a child can be a convenient feeding source, if, you know, it's a kind of terrible metaphor, but feeding source for the mother to feel valued, wanted, needed,
loved, connected.
loved,
Yes,
you know, exactly,
totally.
exactly. So it's like, I feel so much compassion for the whole thing. You know, it's like we're all victimized in different ways. And so understanding that landscape can be so helpful to know. Well, that was the journey I went on, was to discover what is the landscape from which I came, and how do I transform those deficiencies and illusions so that I can actually know what's true. And that's what I developed through the therapy process, was like a real passion. Like, I'm sick of performing and, you know, giving and feeling depleted. I want to get to the truth. I want to be nourished by what is true, what is real, who am I? And so I learned through my therapist how to lean into those places, how to not turn away from my fears like my parents modeled, which was a lot of numbing out and dissociating and substances and stuff. Instead, how do we learn to lean towards those places that feel scary and start to befriend them and embrace them?
You know, when I think about the work that you do, you know, it's philosophy. You're a philosopher. That's how I think about it. You know what I mean? Like really developing a model, a way of thinking, and a new approach to understanding the human condition, you know, and that has been, and it's so interesting because we don't call people philosophers anymore, especially if they're not men. But that's what I think about that work. Like, here's a way to understand the human condition, which has been the role of philosophers forever. You know, like, let's think about it in this way. That's always how I personally have thought about the work, you know, of how we understand the human condition. Okay. So you're going through this path. You are exploring, you are working with a psychotherapist to understand what is true. How do I nourish, you know, how do I live a whole and complete life as myself? Who am I? You know, all of these really powerful questions. And what was the point, you know, because this is a process that you've been working through for, you know, it continues to unfold.
Still,
right?
I'm still working with her. 20,
yeah, I mean, that's amazing.
25 years. Yeah. It's such a lucky thing. I can't believe it. I feel like I'm molting deeply at the deepest part of my journey right now, almost like a crab or a snake. Like right now, I just feel both the shame dissolving and also the defenses against the shame, because under that is where the real gold is, you know?
Yes. So how did the book and the work, because before the book was an incredibly popular blog, articles, workshops, course, you know, and of course the one-on-one work that you do with clients. How did that work get born?
Yeah.
Walk us through that. Yeah. Your evolution as an entrepreneur, writer, teacher, mentor, and I'll throw in philosopher.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So how it developed. So things got better. I was able to separate more from my family of origin. I got married. I was working in academia, and I reached a point where it was kind of like I would say there's a particular phase, the particular thing happened. And from there, I really felt afterwards, like, this is the work. I had a huge epiphany. So what happened was, so my relationship with my mother, as I mentioned, it's codependent, extremely codependent. I was trying to separate from her and stay connected, right? Like, how do I be myself and hold on to this relationship? Because it always felt like if I'm myself, I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
There was this always a either or, black or white kind of vibe. And actually that's what happened. I was 27 years old. I was like, had done so much therapy up to that point. And I was like, all right, I'm ready. I'm ready to actually confront my mom and say, I really would love to shift this dynamic into something that works for both of us. What do you think? You know? And so I did that. I knew it was going to be like a bomb that went off in my life. And it actually was worse than I thought. She, instead of saying, wow, I want to talk to you. I value you. I want to learn what's happening with you. And I want to work with you on this. She took it as an attack. Like, you don't love me. You're not my daughter anymore. I don't know who you are. Like, it was just this complete rejection. So I went through that really rough time where it was like, wow, my mother's legit gonna cut me off because I want to go to a new level. I was actually just speaking out, setting boundaries, but with love and compassion. I spent hours and hours in therapy trying to couch my language so that it was non-threatening, so that it was really clear, like, and then it just became clear, like, nope, it's all or nothing with her. Like, I'm her, I was like, I'm her emotional prostitute or I'm nothing.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. And so I lived through it. I actually ended up having to try to get a restraining order against her because I actually started being afraid of her for various reasons. And they wouldn't grant that because she hadn't done anything violent yet. But I went through that and I was like, wow, it was that bad. It was worse. But as I worked through that, and I said to myself, I'm going through the hardest thing I think any woman could go through. And I want to be as conscious as possible. Like, I'm not going to numb out. I don't want to check out in some way. I want to feel it all. Like, I had developed enough resilience that I was like, all right. And I sensed that there was something almost like transpersonal about it. Like, it felt like it had some macro level importance, right? And so
of course it did.
It
you know,
did.
like, because when you think about the work, and which we'll talk about, and the impact and the, you know, it's so interesting. It did have that. It was transpersonal.
It did. Yeah. It did. So long story short, to wrap it up, as I came out of that and doing that work, again in therapy, and just journaling ravenously, and just getting even more passionate about the process, I came out the other side, like maybe 6 months to a year later, like, this is giving me all the things that I wanted and that I've been searching through spirituality and through other self-help stuff, modalities and things. This mother-daughter work is crucial and no one's talking about it. And this is the missing piece, because so many things were happening in my direct experience. Like, I was starting to finally feel like I could love myself, love my body. I felt like I finally landed in my own separate self. I actually had a lot of spiritual kind of openings after that. It was just like, wow, I am part of life. It was like I went through something existential as well. And I'm just like, I need to start talking about this. Because as I went through this, I'm like, I started to see other women struggling with different things, well, thinking they were other things, but they were actually the mother wound issues, but misattributing them to other things.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure. Like, I know a lot, like, I'm thinking about the people that I was hanging out with around the time, and I was with a lot of women at that time in different groups and communities. And a lot of women were like, I need to learn a lot, like, similar to me. I need to learn more. I need to get more knowledge. So I'm going to, go to school more, get this certification. Or meanwhile, what was happening underneath was they were also struggling in their relationship with their moms. They didn't feel good enough. They felt like, so it was all compensatory. The surface story was actually compensating for something much deeper. And so when I started going public with what I was doing, women started coming to me like, I think this is something I'm dealing with, or can you do workshops? Like, people were writing me like, we need more of this. Thank you for talking about it. And then I just continued as I went into the entrepreneurial world. I started seeing very high level women, like, still in that push, exert, force, strive mode, which was my identity, right? I can still relate to that, but it was like a proving energy. And that proving energy underneath it usually has a shame-based core, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if I just do enough, if I just do more, if I have more willpower, then I'm going to get there. But then the there actually doesn't actually materialize. It's always the next thing because we're running from something much deeper. It's almost like, if you pull a weed out of the ground, if you just pull it from the surface level, the root's still there. It's going to come back up. So the mother wound, when I started developing my philosophy and my theory, was the mother wound is the root. It's the root of these patterns that replicate themselves in our lives that are based around our blueprint of self and basically what it means to be safe. It's all about how do we be safe in the world? Because that child inside of us that's a living energy, she will shut down the shop. She'll sabotage anything that feels remotely unsafe based on the patriarchal patterns we inherited from our mothers, right? That say, don't rock the boat, don't be too big, don't be too confident, don't make mistakes without shame. Like all these things that women aren't supposed to do. So our safety in the first half of our lives is kind of like built around what we've absorbed from our mothers. And so I'm going a little ahead into theory, but so as I did that, the blog happened, women wanted, immediately the demand started, especially in Europe. And then I at the time I went to Europe and I did all these sold out workshops in all these countries. And it was so much fun because, well, it was fun. And it was also hard because, I'd walk into these rooms of, 30 women, 35 women, and there'd be this heavy energy. Like I could just feel like what they were carrying. Right. But by the end of the workshop, it was like, there was this sparkly energy. It was light around women getting to share this taboo, and saying, oh my God, I'm not the only one. Like there's 10 of people that were dealing with the same thing, and the liberating energy that comes from that. So that's how it all really just, it went up right from there.
Yes. So just as a curious aside, this, initial significant interest from Europe in your work, was that kind of a random thing, i.e. it was a European influencer who happened to discover the work? Or do you think there's something else there? There was something else about the European women who were more ready for this work. I'm just curious about where you think that came from, if there's a pattern there or if it was random.
I think it's a both and, because there was one woman who wrote to me. I had released an article. She wrote and said, hey, can I translate this into Spanish? Her name is Sophia Style, and she's a very well-respected influencer there. And I said, you know what? I'm actually going to be in Barcelona. It was like a week before I had already planned to go there, which is super rare that I was going to Europe. And she's like, yeah, we'll arrange it. We'll have it happen. And then I did the workshops there, and she's like, well, I have contacts here and there, so we'll just arrange. And it just kind of blew up through that network, which was amazing. And I think the women who are in Europe, what I noticed was the women that were conscious about the suffering that was in their families due to war and socio-political strife of any sort had the heaviest mother wounds. So and that was really a learning for me as well. It's like the grappling with history is something that I think people in Europe have done a bit more. Whereas in America, I think we're only just awakening to the consequences and the repercussions of our history. There's so many of us that are not aware of history at all. And I think culture and media kind of set us up in that bubble so that we're easily controlled. But I think there is a lot to that. I'm always asking myself that question. I think there's more to discover there.
Yeah.
But
fascinating. Okay. So let's talk about the mother wound itself. So what is it?
Yeah. I like to talk about quickly 4 levels of the mother wound. The most important one is the personal level of the mother wound. And what that is it's something we all have. It's on a spectrum from severe to mild. And there's many factors that go into where we fall on that spectrum. But basically on the personal level, the mother wound is an internalized set of limiting beliefs and patterns that cause us to unconsciously self-sabotage ourselves. So it's the ways in which we are set up to limit and hold ourselves back as a way to secure love, safety, and belonging. So it's basically the intersection between our most basic human needs and patriarchy, right? If you want to look at it that way. And it's a combination of family trauma, but also, and here's the second piece, which is the cultural mother wound. Feminists of the second wave said that the family is the primary institution of patriarchy. So we all live in this atmosphere. And by patriarchy, I just mean in the most broad sense, that belief that women are less than, and how that is systematically everywhere. And so we have this atmosphere. Mothers and daughters grow up and live and interact with each other inside this toxic atmosphere that says that women as a whole are less than. And so mothers inevitably pass that down to some degree in order to keep their daughters safe, on some level, like don't be too big, don't attract too much attention, yada, yada. So on the cultural level, it's like, this is what we're swimming in, and our parents all have it to some degree. They've compliant with it to some degree, right? And so mothers and daughters, there's a kind of codependency in patriarchy where, as I mentioned earlier, women are not allowed or encouraged to have their own separate, fully flourishing identity with no shame for needs and wants and all that comes with being human, right?
Yeah.
So that's the cultural level. And at the cultural level is where, we see a lot of the competition and comparison between women, right? There's this overall sense of scarcity, that there's not enough love, there's not enough power. And so we have to jockey and manipulate to get on the top of this hierarchy. And usually in the culture, we're not always conscious of this, but it's the most yielding, submissive women who get the most, right? And proximity to white men and power structures as well. So there's a lot in there. And then the third level of the mother wound is the spiritual level. So there's a spiritual mother wound, which really has to do with our connection with life itself. Do I feel like I belong on this planet? Can I trust life? Is there a higher power that's looking out for me? Did I come from goodness? So these are really deeper existential questions. And I found that the deeper I went in healing my own mother wound trauma, the more it became evident. And this is a deepening process I'm inside of right now, where it's like, it becomes evident that all life is one, and I'm part of life. I'm part of the one, and we all are. Everything's actually benevolent, but through the lens of our wounds, we filter reality to feel different ways. So there's a really kind of evolutionary gift, I think, inside the mother wound on a spiritual level, that we get to feel compassion on such a large level that everything gets included. When we can feel that we're lovable and a miracle, that like I'm a miracle, everyone else is a miracle too, and everyone and everything is held in this benevolence that's indestructible. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So let's talk through this. So let's take those. So we've got the personal, the cultural, the spiritual, and there was one
and the
more.
planetary.
So let's start with the personal. So if the mother wound is an internalized set of beliefs that limits women, or whereby we limit ourselves inside a larger patriarchal culture. So if we can go through those 4 different levels, just to really give an example of practically what might this look like. So let's think about it on a personal level. So on a personal level, how might the mother wound manifest itself? What would be an example, like just a super simple, basic example of, if there's any such thing with respect to the mother wound, but what's an example of how a woman entrepreneur might experience the mother wound on a personal level?
Yeah. On the personal level, it might be something like, she might've gotten a message from her childhood, from her family members, and especially her mother, that, it's not possible for you as a woman to have your own business, or, you're not going to be as safe if you do that. So she might've gotten those messages overtly or covertly. And so it's in her subconscious, it's circulating in her mind. So she might feel like, oh, I have to do like a zillion things. I have to go to all these coaches. I have to go to get a million degrees. And then, so she might have analysis paralysis, like, oh, I can't really get started until I'm perfect. That could be operating. It also could be giving authority to others and not owning one's own authority. So wanting to maybe teach other people's work and maybe not wanting to own your own original thinking. It could also be fear of anxiety around money, like, oh my gosh, because the mother symbolizes support, right? So money really does factor into that. So anxiety about, can I support myself? Do I have enough? Am I enough? So overall, a sense of scarcity around many different areas. Yeah. And then, so that can be operating in the background. I like to say that the mother wound's like an invisible fence, keeps us inside of certain thoughts and behaviors without us even realizing it. So, and on the cultural level, so if you wanted to go up a level, it's reinforced all around us. We live in a capitalist, white, supremacist, misogynist society. So everybody wants to make money off of our insecurities. So she could spend thousands of dollars on many different programs that aren't really giving her what she needs. She might also be numbing out and not wanting to go to therapy, or, kind of terrified of what's in there for me. I know I struggled with that. Like, can I handle what I uncover? So, and also if that wasn't modeled in her family as well. So there could be like numbing out happening, as well, distractions, just there's so many things that could happen. And culturally, they're all reinforced. So it really takes a lot of will and support to be able to kind of counteract those distractions that can pull us away from our own inner knowledge. So that's cultural. She could also look at other women and say, oh, look at them, they're doing it. I can't do it. I'm not good enough. I'm never going to get there. I've been doing this for a long time and I'm not getting any better. So that can also be operating as well.
Because what's so interesting here is that these are all, as you're describing these experiences, I'm sure so many women who are listening have experienced these things. And what I'm getting from what you're saying is that many of us take those experiences and internalize them as something that is unique to us, our specific circumstances, and that we have somehow created those challenges, difficulties, experiences. And what you're suggesting is no, that's actually what, it's not caused by us. It is actually a manifestation of this larger personal, cultural, social, planetary wound called the mother wound.
Yes, exactly. And it has to do with a sense of safety. If I had to boil it all down, it's like, we actually feel safe with patriarchal modes. In the book, I actually go through what are the patriarchal, what are those principles? In the book, I actually go through line by line, what they are and how they can manifest in our families. So we feel safe with the things that harm us. And so we bond with toxic, harmful beliefs and patterns, and they become the safety kind of bubble that we grow up in, and we feel safe and we replicate it unconsciously. We have to break that. They kept us safe in childhood, right? Like the belief, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, protected me from the reality of how truly unsafe my parents were. I needed to see them as better and me bad in order to get through childhood, like literally survive it. But then once we're adults, we actually have to do at that critical time, like those actually become barriers to what we want. So how do we dismantle? And so healing the mother wound is, the more I go through it myself, just year after year, it's just like, it's a dismantling of all the accumulated illusions that we have inherited and accumulated through our families and the culture. And so as we, get to the core of who we are, there's an incredible intelligence and life inside us that wants to express and explore. And we can just trust more of that. We can trust what happens on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. We can be in the moment and feel that larger connection that's always there. But we have to look at what helped us feel safe as children, what was unsafe about it, like the mother gap, like we talked about earlier, and how can I fill that mother gap from myself, like from within who I am? Because if we don't do that, we project, this is just human nature, we project outwards this need for validation, love, approval, feeling cherished, feeling honored, feeling celebrated, these human needs that living in a patriarchy in many of our families, we didn't get these things because our parents were wounded themselves. So this is powerful work where we're actually breaking intergenerational patterns that might have gone back thousands of years. So how do we imprint something different? And the mother wound is powerful because at that mother-child level, we're dealing with a blueprint of self. And this is one of the reasons why I find it so inspiring. When we work on this core level, every branch of our lives transforms as a result without even needing to work on each level.
Listen, I totally know what you're talking about. And this is so interesting. So I started going through a thing where I was like, you know what? And it was actually born out of a desire to be more efficient. That's how it showed up. I was just like, I just want to, I want to have a ton of open time. So I want to be, when I am on, I want to be efficient. And so that became the thing that I was interested in exploring. And what was so interesting for me, the outlet was, I'm going through a number of different conversations. I was like, it's all anchored in the body. And in order for me to function at a high level, I have to feel safe. So an easy way, intellectually, I totally know I'm safe, but a super easy way to do this is if I'm thirsty, I'm going to drop everything and get water. If I'm hungry, I'm going to drop everything and eat. So I have to, and if I need to pee, I'm going to drop everything and go. Very basic, simple. There is my 3-step blueprint. But what is so interesting is when you start telling the truth to yourself about what you need, even on its most basic level, what happens is the lies that we tell in other areas become intolerable. That's what I experienced. And so saying something was okay when it wasn't okay became intolerable because I was training my body not to lie, not to pretend it wasn't thirsty when in fact I was thirsty, so I completely see how what you're talking about, starting to feel safe in our body, take care of our needs in one area has dramatically shifts every other aspect. So I've totally experienced that and wanted to share because
love that.
Huge, like I didn't need a script. I just needed to get drink water, drink a fucking glass of water. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I love what you described because it kind of illustrates that point as well, where if we do that, it's like our reference point shifts. And I love when I see this when I work with, I watch them kind of like they're usually, for most of us, it's like our reference point is external. What do other people think of me? How do other people evaluate me? How do I look at them through their eyes? This is a very female, growing in a patriarchal thing. We don't know or see ourselves. We only see ourselves as observers. So when our reference point changes, it's like, oh, it's internal now. So I'm now located in my body. I'm the authority over what is right and best for me in any moment. And the outside is not primary anymore. And I just watch it when women just become unstoppable in that moment where it's just like, oh, a light bulb goes on, like, oh, I am the reference point. I get to have the freedom to decide a real yes, a real no. And then you start to trust, because then you're seeing, like you said, oh, I'm seeing that actually this is trustworthy. My body is trustworthy. Its signals are wise. Example for me was I had to learn how to trust the signal. As a child, I had to disable a signal that said, I'm done. I need space, or I need to be in my own area. I need to not engage. I had to turn that off as a kid. And so as an adult woman, I had to learn, oh, there's a signal. Because what I would do is say yes, 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 yes to everything. And then I would collapse. Collapse was my only boundary. So I had to learn to set early and often was my mantra, early and often. Set a boundary early and often. Or just say, I'll get back to you on that. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel. I'll get back to you. That was a massive life-changing process for me to just stop myself from saying yes to everyone and everything, So that's another example of finding a way into how did I need that to survive? That kept me safe. But now I need to actually get back to what my body is saying and what my truth is in any moment. And just trust, you start to trust wow, I am trustworthy. I am my most safest person.
Yeah.
Not anyone out there.
Okay. And I'm curious about, for you, how this work shifted how you relate to your ambition. Because one of the things that I have found so fascinating, one of the big shifts that I have made, is this idea of setting goals. So goals, what I noticed as I've kind of done work and thought, in my own way, is that my relationship to goals is completely different. Goals always used to be something outside me. And thus because it was outside, you're always trying to move yourself toward it. Right. Ergo, it's fucking exhausting.
It really is.
Right. So, and yet I also am not just going to lie on the sofa. I mean, some days I totally lie on the sofa, but there's also, but I'm still really believe that that creating things and intending things and going for things, or, allows us to unlock more and more of who we are. So I think finding that, so I'm curious about,
I love this question,
this internal reference point and how that has shifted your relationship with goals and goal setting.
I wish we could do a whole hour on this, because this is really juicy stuff and I'm really on the edge of it right now. And I feel like what it's done is it's actually, when my book came out, that was a big moment for me internally. It was like that big goal was done. And I realized like, you know, nothing external can actually give me anything. Like I actually went through a grieving process of like grieving the world. Like the world, external world cannot give me anything.
I
lasting.
remember talking to you at this moment because
Oh my God.
I totally remember this. Like I completely, yeah.
So just to fast forward, because it was such a, you know, evolving process. It's like now I don't actually have any really strong desires, which is incredible. I feel really full. Like it's been 7 years of building my business. At this point, I work about 2 hours a day. I do not work very much. I'm doing a lot more play and just resting. And so when I want to work, I'm forcing myself, like I'm no longer forcing myself. I'm just like, I'm done. My exhaustion has been my biggest teacher. It teaches me when to stop. And as the journey went on, it was like, it would stop me really quick. My body would not tolerate forcing. I actually can't force myself to do it. I'll get sick.
And was that your inner mother?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of inner mother and just, I would say even spiritual helpers, you know, just on a larger level, a combination of life is like, you're evolving, you're not going to evolve beyond this. You know, you have to evolve and you have to let go of forcing. And I realized that forcing was how I survived. It was a relic and an artifact of a different reality. And my reality is different now. And I can trust my body and trust life. And when I look back at my life, I'm like, I've always been cared for. Like just the fact that where I live now, how that came about. I live in a mother-daughter chapel. It's crazy. All the signs are there. So I'm just trusting. And I actually don't care. It's weird. I don't care about ambition or my business actually very much anymore. I just have this trust. I'm just floating.
Oh my gosh. Thank gosh you're in a chapel because that was sacrilege.
I know. Well, there's no image to project. There's no image to protect. I don't actually care as much about what other people think of me. Because there's so many different truths that are kind of coming together in powerful ways that it's like, there is no scarcity. This body is temporary. I'm going to enjoy it. There's nothing worth my energy of struggle and striving. That's a different reality.
You know, this is so interesting because so often we think about this sort of epidemic of burnout, particularly among women, and we talk about it like it's a bad thing. And of course, it's potentially a bad thing. But if you are to look at it, like what you've said is no, actually that for me, my exhaustion and burnout has been my biggest teacher. It's actually the boundary. It's like a messenger.
Yeah, it is.
Certain, it shows you, pay attention to it. Stop trying to deal with it, you know, but like observe it, learn from it. It's fascinating to even think about like all the people who've experienced burnout, and we look at it again as it's something to be ashamed of. It's something to not like about ourselves. It's something that's wrong. And yet what I'm hearing you say is, hey, it's actually a great teacher.
Yeah, there's a different way. Our exhaustion is telling us to stop, slow down. There's a different, easier way to do things. And it's about trusting those signals. Don't override. Like I did that. I was an overworker. I was a overachiever and a workaholic. You know, probably up until about a year and a half ago, I was still struggling with that, but my body kept stopping me. And I think I'm glad I built my business up to a point where I was so that I could actually, you know, pull back. And I learned valuable lessons. You know, those adaptations were important and they served me very well. But there's just a point as we evolve where those things don't serve. And we have to step into a trust of like, and the body is great because it just makes it super immediate. Like I have to do something different. And then a different way can show up, but we have to be kind of open to it. And it's like that non-negotiable, like I can't do this that way. I can't do that thing anymore. I can't do fatigue. The collapse can't be my only boundary. I have to, and now I see my boundaries are super high right now. And it's like, it's making my energy super potent. So it's like reduce down to what's the most essential and feed only the essential, you know?
But was there
So
not
hard
a
to pack
time?
this into a year,
I know,
into an
I know,
hour.
I know. There's just no way. So here's another. I know Bethany and I are looking at the clock and we have 4 minutes and we're like, oh my gosh, we didn't even get to what we were going to talk about. We need to do a 2-parter. But here's another question for you. My own relationship, because I would say I am different in the sense that I have an ambition. And it's
Yeah.
more like, and I guess that the way that it's different is it feels more organic in the sense that it's more like a vision and intention.
Yeah.
And I can feel the energy. Like I do not stress out. I'm just like, of course it's going to happen.
Right. There's no rigidity or
there's no
clenching around it.
rigidity. Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
And there used to be a lot of that. But here's what
Yeah.
I've noticed, and I still struggle this because I'm not sure if I'm as evolved as you are, but I still struggle with it a little bit. And here's why: there's still moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's terrifying. It's terrifying to not have a goal. It's terrifying to,
Ooh,
there'll
that's
still
juicy.
be moments, right? Right?
Well, that is juicy. What does it mean? And that's where my growth has taken me, is to this emptiness. And that was a place I think a lot of us are really scared of. But that emptiness actually is intelligence. There's an intelligence in there that is actually, if we can open to it, it's always been, my experience is it's always been there carrying me. It was an illusion that my striving was actually making shit happen. It's always carrying us, like showing the way, guiding the path, making things happen. We can actually surrender more into that vibe of like, I'm gonna live moment to moment, and whatever shows up, I'm gonna handle. I can have a goal, but like there's no tension around it. There's no like attachment to outcome, because it doesn't have the heaviness of this means something about me. It's just another experience, So I think that emptiness you talk about is so powerful. I mean, I think that's where we want to get.
That's exactly what it feels like. And yeah, it's terrifying because it is this emptiness. It's just this space, it's just this quiet space.
The unknown.
Yeah. And it's very different. And there are very few people who talk about it. It's not, it's like the antithesis of the sort of success literature culture.
Totally.
Right. It's really different. And I have personally had the experience of, it's just a lot of enjoyment with flashes of pure terror.
Oh my God, I can so relate. Yeah. And I think even it's a relationship with fear. Transforming your relationship with fear is part of healing the mother wound journey, because there's this fear of annihilation as children that we have, but we need to surrender to truly be connected to everything that's happening. So in my experience, it was like, I couldn't surrender to my higher self because it meant annihilation as a child. So I've had to soothe that part of myself, the children in me that are terrified. That means if I open to the emptiness, I'm going to be dead. I'm going to I'm gone. But actually soothing that fear of the unknown helps us to open to it and realize that this is actually a peaceful existence. We can live inside of this peace, and things are still going to happen. Like, we don't actually make shit happen. Things happen. And the things that are meant for us are going to happen for us. And the things that are not meant for us are not going to happen for us. So it's a real deep trust that flowers underneath the struggle, realizing that we're being held. We are being held the whole time. This is my experience. I can't speak for anybody else, but there's a real beauty in like really settling into that trust. Like, wow. And there's a play. Like for me right now, my life is more about play and about lightness and giggles and fun. I also have days where I have grief come up, right? But it's all okay. It's all part of what's here now. And it just feels better to live this way. And, and there's nothing to defend. There's nothing to feel shame about. There's nothing to prove anymore. There's nothing worth the exhaustion. And more trusting also like who I am. Everything's going to work out. There's just like, there's an inner safety that's developed through the process where it almost becomes less important what happens in the outside world. It's about living through that living as the true self, which is deeper than anything on the outside. And things just happen. You just trust that things are going to happen. Okay.
Yeah. But it's also something that I think it's also so incredibly countercultural.
It is
Because what you're essentially saying is what, our cultural, our cultural definition of status, right? And culture and status are huge for humans. That doesn't matter to me anymore.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm hearing you say, right?
Yeah.
And that is totally radical.
Eleanor, it's freedom.
Yeah.
There's nothing to defend. There's nothing to strive for. It's all here. It's awesome. And it's totally counterculture, but we need more people to get here. And because then things can really shift on the outside, but we need to change this inner landscape that keeps recreating the wars and the scarcity on the outside. And I think it lands somewhere in that realm of, we project our worst fears from childhood. We have to deal with what happened then and not keep projecting it out into the world. That scarcity, that comparison, that pain, that happened in the past in our childhoods. If we don't deal with it, we'll keep projecting it.
Yeah. And then that freedom that you talk about is unattainable.
Yeah. It just gets more postponed. So don't postpone.
I'm curious, do you know many people who are living with the level of, I'm going to call Blythe disregard for culture and status that you do you know? Because it's hugely challenging because it's an anti-survival. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of anti to what we're conditioned around survival. And that's one of the things that I find, that's what I talk about the terror. That's basically what that is. Do you know many people who are living that way, or have you encountered many people who are living like that? I certainly haven't.
No.
Yeah.
I'm learning how to do it from scratch by myself. I don't know. I have a small circle of people that I connect with on a regular basis, but besides my therapist, I'm the only one I know personally at this point that are doing it. So it can be lonely at times, but it's so nourishing. Yeah. Everything about it is so nourishing, and it's impersonal. Ultimately, it's like, I think even beyond my personal self, we're all evolving, and where everyone is on their journey right now is valid. And we're all learning different things. We're all at different levels. This is a school. I feel like this is a realm of learning. It's not a realm of peace on the external, we're just learning things based on our experiences. And, so just lean into it, lean into what you're learning about yourself on the inside, because everything else on the outside is secondary. It will all fall into shape and be reorganized based on how you are inside.
Yeah.
That's
so
been
powerful.
My experience. Like my primary isn't my business. My primary is the inner work. And that's been true for me for my entire life, basically. And that's why I trust now, because I know I have evidence, 43 years of evidence that this is prioritizing your inner work is where everything will flow from that.
Right. Well, I so appreciate you for really sort of for living it, for being, I really truly admire, your willingness to live that and to talk about it and to teach from that place. I know some people are going to listen, and if you don't understand what we're talking about, that's totally okay.
Totally.
Give it time and listen 6 months from now and listen 6 months from now. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was in therapy, and my therapist, Linda, she asked me something, and I was like, I don't understand. And she looked at me, she said, sweetie, sometimes when we don't want to understand, we don't. When it's too scary to understand, we don't, So I think like just, having this very countercultural approach to how you live, it's exciting to see. It's really inspirational. And I think everybody needs to go out, and read this book and start trying to learn and understand.
Yeah. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Oh my gosh, so much fun. And we definitely are going to need to do part 2.
We are, because we didn't even get to the juicy bits for the women entrepreneurs. I hope that made sense. I love how we went into different places with it.
I know. It was fun. It was fun. They're going to love it.
I
Awesome.
appreciate
Thank you,
you.
Bethany.
Take care, Eleanor. Bye.
You too. Bye.